Excellency Cabinet Secretary Mamalwa, Excellency the Minister for Karamoja Affairs, all the delegations present here. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So let me start with what the Prime Minister of Uganda said today. And he said that there are three triggers, there are three things that are keeping Sub-Saharan Africa in a state of scourge of instability. First of them is ethnic violence. Now that ethnic violence spills over from cattle rustling to everything else. Then he talked about the scourge of violent extremism, which is another reality and a fact that we are confronted with. And third, we've got areas of deep pockets of instability. Whether it's Somalia on one side or it's South Sudan on the other side, we have the Democratic Republic of Congo on the other side. So we have these pockets of instability, which takes away those opportunities of gaining the development gains that we need, which are so necessary. And what is it that we should be looking at very carefully? If I were to look at Sub-Saharan Africa and perhaps even compare that to parts of India, I'll say three things are major drivers of these conflicts. Number one is the proliferation of small arms. It's available everywhere. You can pick up a stone and you'll probably find the ammunition of an AK-47 concealed there for a subsequent operation. Number two is deep sense of tribal, ethnic, and clan loyalties, which again become, and these clan loyalties are perhaps necessary in that circumstance because those clans also act as social safety nets. And therefore it reinforces the need for governance and rule of law and all those things that are necessary. And third is a disastrous economic situation. Now if you look at the Karamoja area, look at parts of Somalia, look at many parts of the world, you'll find these three things are most endemic in what keeps that level of instability. It keeps a thriving violence. It creates a parallel economy of violence. Because there is trade taking place in weapons and ammunition and people and human trafficking. So it starts an entire new cycle of an economic cycle which benefits a very few, but keeps a large chunk of the population in a state of despondency, in a state of anger, in a state of abject poverty, and this is what we have seen. And here is where I want to applaud the leadership of Kenya and Ethiopia, which came together in 2015 in a place called Moyale, which is in the Marsabit County, bordering the southern part of Ethiopia, a place called Borona, where they started a discussion with those 35 clans, all ethnic clans there, to end the internecine nature of their violence. And what was that violence all about? It was about a competition for resources. It was for water. It was for pastures. And they managed not only to contain it, but then the Prime Minister Haile Mariam of Ethiopia and President Kenyatta of Kenya came and shook hands and said, look, let's end this. Let's talk to our communities to come together. And an MOU was signed between the two foreign ministers at that spot on Moyale. It was a tremendous day for all of us, those of us from the UN family, civil society, to witness what political will can do in terms of social and demographic transformation. And immediately after that, programs started to happen. If you ever go there now, you'll be quite surprised by what you will see. It's got probably one of the largest windmill projects implemented by the government of Kenya. There are health facilities, schools, water points, an entire development agenda which is started. And any of you who've seen the movie Mad Max, you'll see there's a road in that movie which goes from one part of that territory to the other. Now that road, it looks like a German autobahn which connects the port of Lamu all the way to Addis. Suddenly, the number of youth have started to find gainful employment around that. The governments on both sides have encouraged employment. And what it has also done is brought the UN system, which the Secretary General of the UN has been driving for about the United Nations family to deliver as one, has brought the UN system in Kenya and in Ethiopia to work together in these bordering areas. There's an office which is coming up on the Ethiopia side of Moyale, where we'll actually be sharing an office in order to make sure that our programs continue to go. And the regional authority, the whole angle of devolution, which is deeply getting embedded in Kenya, which the Honorable Minister Eugene Wamalwa is leading, has started to entrench. Suddenly, politics and power has come closer to the people. Suddenly delivery of services has come closer to the people. So in the last 3 years, what we are seeing is a dramatic transformation. And I can't tell you how encouraged I am actually to see the two most important drivers and leaders that will actually help the Karamoja aspect of it happen, because I've already started a conversation with my counterpart here in Uganda, Rosa Malanga, who's actually very, very keen for the UN system to work together on this, because this is where the UN is also going to be effective. This is precisely the vision of the UN Secretary General about the prevention agenda, and the prevention will start by precisely some of those actions that has taken place on the Ugandan and the Kenyan side. Is how do we give opportunities for the youth? And let's be very clear, ladies and gentlemen, Africa's median age is 18. We are the youngest continent in the world. Over 70% of our population is less than 30. By 2050, we will have 830 young people between the age group of 15 to 45. 830 million of a population of 2.3 billion. What does this mean for us? If you look at all the areas of sub-Saharan Africa which has a huge youth bulge, you also have huge amounts of instability there. Why? Because the youth are not gainfully employed, and this is exactly what we need. We need a Marshall Plan of the same scale that the United States had in Europe post-Second World War. Therefore, the topic of today's conversation is important. What the Marshall Plan did post-Second World War to an impoverished Europe was it virtually helped Europe rebuild. It put people to work. It suddenly found men and women at the household level, the microeconomic picture started to improve. Better nourishment, nutrition, access to education, and you had a generation of young Europeans coming up that were capable. This is exactly what happened with the Asian tigers. Look at the trajectory of the Asian tigers. We don't have to look at Western Europe alone. Look at South Korea, Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia. All these countries achieved certain minimum standards of health, of education, of access to employment, and that is what started to transform their economy. It's not that we are left behind in Africa. Africa's moment has just arrived. South Korea had a total fertility rate of about 4 to 6, which means on an average a woman was producing 4 to 6 children. So their population was growing at about 1 million per year. This is exactly what's happening in Kenya today. From the moment you woke up and the moment you go to sleep, there would have been 3,000 Kenyans born. Kenya's population was the same as Sweden in 1956, 7 million. Today Kenya is 46 million, Sweden is 10 million. By 2050, Kenya will be 90 million. But that's the biggest opportunity. Just between Kenya, Ethiopia, Uganda, we will have a population of approximately 400 to 500 million people. Can you imagine the potential of this market? But a market which has opportunities. It will be the economies of scale which will transform global economies. And that, so if I was an American or a European, I'd be very worried about my pension funds, because those funds are not making much money. And you take 5,000 Kenya shillings and put it into a fixed deposit in Kenya, the return of investment goes up to about 7%. This is what the nature of emerging economies are. So if we are smart, then we would actually apply our public-private partnership enterprises in focusing in these areas which has that potential scale of growth and opportunity. So I really believe what Kenya and Ethiopia did recently, just yesterday, the Under-Secretary General for Counter-Terrorism, a gentleman by the name at the UN, a gentleman by the name of Ambassador Voronkov, called on Cabinet Secretary Wamalwa. He was actually quite struck by the progress Kenya has made in addressing issues of violent extremism, in addressing issues of instability. The frontier counties of Kenya, such as places like Mandera and Wajir and Marsabit, which have seen huge amounts of not just cross-border terror, but also internecine violence. All that has suddenly started to drop. And the general just got up. I can't tell you how thrilled I was. I'm a former soldier. I served for 10 years in the Indian Army Special Forces. And of that, I spent 5.5 years in combat situations. I can tell you one thing. There is no winning by kinetic force. No country has ever won. But that opportunity is precisely what the general is trying to do. Empower these young peoples, make them feel included, make them feel a part of that of the DNA of that nation state, and you'll see the transformation. I have seen it, witnessed it over the last 4 years in Kenya. I really think what Kenya and Ethiopia are doing can potentially be a model for the rest of Africa. So I'm really encouraged that we're already talking about the social and political transformation that can happen in Uganda, because, ladies and gentlemen, the future is Africa. That's the reality. That is a demographic reality. That we can't change. So Africa has to get rich, which is why we need the private sector to crowd into the space, to provide the jobs, to provide employment, and to have the markets through which they would be able to then sell their goods and services. And what Kenya, Ethiopia, and Kenya, Uganda will soon be doing is giving teeth to the signing of the free trade agreement which took place in Rwanda, which is about the free movement of goods, services, and people. We are now looking at the African Union becoming the new model of the European Union, and this is precisely what will happen when you want to see the kind of economic trajectory that we want to see Africa taking place. So you will find me sounding very optimistic simply because I've seen that happen in Kenya. I've seen the kind of change what political leadership can really do. So I would say there are 3 Ps that are critical and essential to this. Number 1 is political will, which is in great abundance in my host country that I'm in right now and in Kenya. Number 2 is policy. The kind of policies which are now being implemented by having a devolution minister, which was unheard of 7-8 years ago in Kenya. These were counties which are in northern Kenya which are not just marginalized. I would just say perhaps the word abandoned would be more appropriate. But the moment the government put the spotlight on these places, you should see the kind of transformation which is taking place. And the third, very, very critical, is the out-of-the-box part, is the public-private sector, is to look at these areas as potential economic growth, models at which goods, markets, and services will come in, because the private sector is not there for charity, and we should not count on them for charity. We need them there because they will provide employment and they will also make a profit, and those are exactly the mechanisms that we need. So which means if we get the inflection of these, or the convergence of these 3 Ps together, we are at a good place. So this conference today is perhaps most timely to see 2 high-level ministers from their respective governments actually seated next to each other. And what could be more happier for a UN system person is to be actually seated between them. It's truly spectacular for me to be here as part of the UN country team. And I know my counterpart over here, Rosa, is on leave, but she's monitoring Twitter and all that very carefully. So we are looking forward to the Minister of Karamoja Affairs coming to Kenya very soon, and we promise that we'll play a round of golf. I don't match his handicap, but we'll do that and discuss other things. So thank you very much to the organizers over here. Have a good day.